Hey.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. You see us?
Oh, Father Rafa.
Hello.
I didn't see you yesterday, Father Rafa.
Sorry, but you're inside.
You ready?
But there are people listening below our conversation. There's other.
Okay. You can hear me?
Yes, you ready?
All right.
Okay.
Yep, I'm ready.
Yeah, okay. Pray. Let's pray. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tui mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostre. Sancta Michael, ora pro nobis. Sancta Teresa, ora pro nobis.
Okay. So this afternoon, we'll three things. First, it's to review. I gave you another version of class 0, the introduction. Okay. Maybe we can do that first. If you can go to class 0, the introduction, the new version. The new version adds a number 4 after number 3, coverage.
Faith, customs, and sanctity.
Okay. Now, really, the themes are the same topics listed in coverage, except that they are divided into 3. The first 3, 1, 2, 3, and then you have 11. Sorry. Oops. It's 4, 5, 6, 7. It's not, I'm sorry, it's not 11, 12, 13, 14. It's 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8, 9, 10. There's something wrong with the numbering. Next time that I will send it again with the right numbering. Okay. Now, what do I mean by themes? Well, we don't have all this time really to go into all the details of the history of the church. And I thought we can just focus on 3 themes. First, the theme of the beginnings. So that's 1, 2, 3. But already in the beginnings, in 1610, by 1610, we already see some of the difficulties that later on will become prominent in the revolution. So that's number 3. So we'll see that. Also see in 1, 2, 3. Well, I mean, the fact that we'll look a little bit into the reasons. Well, some of the possible reasons why the faith is so deep here in the Philippines. At least the human reasons. The socio-political reasons why the faith, or social-cultural reasons why the faith is so very deep here in the Philippines. The second theme, that's, I'm sorry, 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 6, 7. The following page, the theme is really the development of the church in the Philippines, which we will show went hand in hand with the development of our civilization. You have education, then you have social development, and even the political peace, more or less, at least some contribution of the church as peacemaker, uniting the country. Basically, 4, 5, 6. Number 7, it has to do really with the moral wars. Okay, we will look a little bit into that. And then 8, 9, 10. Well, really, it's about the revolution. 8, what is numbered here is wrong. Number 15 problems, at least the major ones that gave rise to the difficult, controversial issues. Okay? And then you have the revolution itself, and then a little bit about the post-revolution church when the Americans came. Okay, so these are the 3 themes, and as you saw in our first session yesterday, much of what we will be doing really here is exchanging historical gossip. Basically, we'll go through the excerpts. We'll go into some of the primary sources. Now, there is also something which I added to introduction. If you turn back to the page before number 3, additional e-sources. These additional e-sources, these are the additional materials that I passed on to you guys today. So first of all, you got the history of the church in the Philippines, the notes of Jojo Lopez. Okay.
Yes.
Secondly, I gave this PDF on history of the church timeline and the list of Spanish monarchs. We will need this in the 3rd class. I mean, tomorrow. We will look, but I already gave it to you so you can have a look at them. And then that last book there in the additional e-sources, Broadly Stark. Well, it's a book that may shed a little bit of light on the second part of this subject when we go to the development of the Philippines and the role of the church in the development of the Philippines. All right?
Yes.
Are we
Yeah.
okay with this? All right.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So can we go back to class 1? We'll just go very quickly to the last few excerpts that we did not finish yesterday in class 1. So can we go to class 1 excerpts?
Okay.
All right. We were looking at excerpt 6. Excerpt 6 talks about the death of Magellan. So this is 26th of April. And there's already mention there of the chief of the island of Man, or Mactan. And so you have this chieftain who would not in any way obey the king of Spain. And the point here is that they tried to tell Magellan, who's the they? Both his men, but also the other Filipino kings that they had befriended, who had been baptized. They were telling Magellan, hey, stay back. We will take care of this. So they were already, they were already preparing themselves for battle. Note, April 26 is just about 2 weeks since the baptism, which was 14th of April. And Magellan arrived on 16th of March. So he was here barely a little bit more than just 2 months here in the Philippines. But then, okay, so we were trying to tell the captain, we'll take care of this. But then Magellan said, no, I'll go. And in fact, that he was in the forefront. He was, 3 boats in front, so he went there.
Yeah.
So in the second stage, you see, they waited for daylight. We were 49 in number. The other 11 remained in charge of the boats. So they were there in the boats while Magellan and his men went to shore. They reached land and found the islanders 1,500 in number, drawn up in 3 squadrons, and they attacked. You know that today is the anniversary, 499th anniversary of the first Mass in the Philippines, right? March 31. So that's today. And then the people here in Banawe were telling me as I entered into class, I should be playing that song by who's that, Lola? Yung 1521. How does that go? Yeah. So of course I said no, I'm not gonna do that. Okay, so let's go on. 2 squadrons attacking us on the flanks and the 3rd in front. Okay. He then, in order to disperse this multitude and to terrify them, sent some of our men to set fire to their houses, but this rendered them more ferocious. They perceived that our bodies were defended, but that the legs were exposed. So they aimed at the legs. Magellan had his right leg pierced by a poisoned arrow, on which account he gave orders to retreat by degrees. But almost all our men took to precipitate flight, so they panicked. So that there remained hardly 6 or 8 of us with the captain. We were oppressed by lances and stones which the enemy hurled at us, and we could make no more resistance. As they knew the captain, they aimed especially at him, and twice they knocked the helmet off his head. He, with a few of us, like a good knight, remained at his post without choosing to retreat further. Thus we fought for more than an hour, until an Indian succeeded in thrusting a cane lance into the captain's face. He then, being irritated, pierced the Indian's breast with his lance and left it in his body. And trying to draw his sword, he was unable to draw it more than halfway on account of a javelin wound which he had received in the right arm. The enemies, seeing this, all rushed against him, and one of them, with a great sword, a great scimitar, gave him a great blow on the left leg, which brought the captain down on his face. Then the Indians threw themselves upon him and ran him through with lances and scimitars and all the other arms which they had, so that they deprived him of life. So this battle was the next day, of course. No, they were preparing on 26th. The next day, at daylight, at dawn, that's when the battle arrived. 27th of April, 1521, Saturday. So there goes Magellan. Okay, the enemy. So amongst the Spaniards, there perished 8, and 4 of the Indians who had become Christians. The enemy lost only 15 men. So not very many people died, but amongst them, Magellan died. Okay. So we give him a 3-second silence. Okay. And then we move on. So what happened? This is the betrayal now. The betrayal. Okay. So you have now the Cebu, Rajo-Kumabon, who are Christians, and then their friends. But then the betrayal started with Enrique. So I am at the historical gossip number 7 of class 1. Enrique, this slave who some people say was in fact Cebuano, well, we don't know. Okay, who had already been to Spain because Magellan had already brought him to Spain and then back, and now he's their interpreting. So this fellow was a little depressed at first. He was in the ship, depressed because his master had died. Now the other Spaniards, or at least one of them, tried to give him orders. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Because he was a slave. And at first he didn't want to do it because he was depressed. And then he was threatened. And he said, if you don't do this, we'll take you back to Spain. You're still a slave. And we'll give you to Magellan's wife. And in fact, now I'm going to flog you. Okay, so he resented that. Enrique resented that. He went outside and he did what he was told. But then, unawares, without the other being aware, he goes to the Raja, Umabon. And this is what he said. Okay, I will read. The king of, having gone ashore, he informed the Christian king that we, the Spaniards, were thinking of going away soon, but that if he, the Raja, would follow his, Enrique's advice, he, the Raja, might become master of all our, the Spaniards, goods and of the ship themselves. The king of Cebu listened favorably to him, and they arranged to betray us. So on Wednesday morning, that is the 1st of May, so 3 days after Magellan had died, 4 days after Magellan 3 days. After Magellan had died, the king sent to tell the two commanders of the ships, who were still there, that the jewels prepared as presents for the king of Spain were ready and invited them to come the same day to dine with him. Okay, Pigafetta stayed behind in the ship. And then afterwards, so they went, 24 of them went. Afterwards, they heard shouting from the shore, from the palace. And then when they drew near, the ships drew near, they saw that some of the Spaniards, one Spaniard went running out and said, "They have killed all the others. Please save me." And but they were still far from shore, and they were so afraid, so they left him. So this one Spaniard who said, he then entreated us to ransom him with some merchandise. But Juan Carvalho, who was amongst the men in the ship, joined with some others, refused to do it. And they would not allow any boat to go ashore so that they might remain masters of the ships. Serrano, this is the one who was the only surviving person. Serrano continued his entreaties and lamentations, saying that if we departed and abandoned him there, he would soon be killed. And after that, he saw his lamentations were useless. He added that he prayed God to ask for an account of his life at the day of judgment. We sailed immediately, and I never heard any more news of him. Okay, so. Yeah. The next excerpt already says that this is the ending of the account of Pigafetta. They arrived September of the year 1522, so almost a year afterwards. So 1521 they left April, and they arrived 1522 September. Okay, they entered the Bay of Sanlúcar. And then, who was the one who was left? Now. The only captain that was left. Anyway, the only captain who was left, together with Pigafetta, went to Don Carlos V. Okay, and then presented to him a book, this account. So that ends the first. Just two more anecdotes. The second one, 9. Two more reports is very, very nice, because you know that between Magellan and Legazpi, there was one other person who reached the Philippines, and this was Villalobos. We know that, no? Because they tried to send again from Mexico this time, but then all of the trials, all the tries ended up in failure, except Villalobos, who was able to reach the Philippines. Okay? But he couldn't stay long either. He stayed long enough to give us our name. So let's go to number 9. Ruy Lopez de Villalobos was appointed Captain General of a new fleet, which consisted of 6 ships and 200 men. 4 Augustinian missionaries joined the expedition as chaplains. So I should remember Valderrama, the first chaplain, probably was a secular priest. But then thereafter, the religious began to be sent, and especially Augustinians. So they had a pleasant 3-month voyage, and then they reached Mindanao on February 2nd, 1543. February 2nd, 1543, Mindanao. The island was named Caesarea Caroli in honor of the emperor. After 1 month, the fleet sailed north to Tendaya. As I said, Tendaya was one of the names given to the islands. I mean, it was only Villalobos, and that's why this is significant, who actually more or less fixed the name of the archipelago. Magellan called the archipelago San Lazaro. Tendaya was more or less the islands of Samar, Leyte, and surrounding areas. They were called Tendaya. They also reached Limasawa, and there they began to feel hunger. They had famine. They had storms, the monsoon. They gained by force a beachhead, so there was now hostility. And there they found a little rice and sago, a few hens, etc., etc. But then at one of the barangays, and the Tendaya littoral, so summer later, etc., they were cordially received and royally entertained by this King Makandala. And then this is written by Father Breganza, Dominican, in a book that was published in 1965. So let's read this. There followed an episode that matched the idyllic storybook story of the first encounter of Magellan and Pigafetta. According to a romantic tale, the king's daughter was 20 years old, extremely gracious and beautiful, and sole heiress of the kingdom and riches. She had fallen in love with the dashing conquistador, and the king and queen had no objections to having a Spaniard for a son-in-law. But the Capitan had no intention of settling down as Raja of Tendaya, and one day sailed suddenly away, leaving behind a broken-hearted princess. Villalobos changed Tendaya to Filipina in honor of Philip, the Prince of Asturias, later King Philip II of Spain. The name of the country was probably suggested by Captain Bernardo de la Torre, since the change of names began after his return to Sarangani from Tendaya. So the names were being changed. I mean, we didn't have any real name until this one. We might then, in this conclusion, we might then perhaps surmise that the name of our country and people recalls not only the King of Spain, but also the first Filipina, because we're already given that name, a lovely, heartbroken princess. So, very nice for historical gossip, no? Okay. Well, this is 1943. 1543. So 20 years later, you have Legazpi coming. So this is the last one of class 10, Legazpi, and he's just saying it is the famous scene where the Cebuanos did not receive them well, so they had to fight their way. Eventually, they won, but then during the battle, during the burnings, they found this child Jesus, which there's a passage, you can look for it, in the account of Pigafetta, was probably something that Pigafetta himself gave to Juana. Because the only other statue that is mentioned by Pigafetta is the one that Magellan showed the queen before she was baptized, but it's that of Our Lady holding our Lord. While the Santo Niño is just, the Santo Niño. Well, so it was there. They worshipped. I mean, they did honor. They venerated the image. It was kept in a cradle, all gilded, with a little cross. And, the little cross, which is generally placed upon the globe in his hand, was lacking. But there were flowers found before it. So they venerated the statue, though no one knows for what object and purpose. Okay, so there you are. This is that ends the first session. We can go now to the second. What time is it? Ooh. You have 20 minutes. Shall we go to the second? Class 2. Again here, we will go very fast. We will not read all. Please read it on your own. As we move forward, I'll be giving these excerpts ahead. Today I was able to give it in the morning, but I'll give a little bit more time so you can read it ahead. So this whole section is about the missionary work of the friars. The first excerpt, again taken from Briganza, it talks about the religion that they found before Christianity. And then you have two excerpts there about, what we generally know already, that quote unquote civilization reached Filipinos because they were gathered bajo la campana. I mean, you know, the church and the place, or the Gobernador Orsillo. And really, it was for the purpose of evangelizing them. They did not have an easy time all the time, because the Filipinos had to go to their fields for their agriculture. But generally, they were able to establish these towns. And then from 5 to 20, you see many anecdotes, many reports of how fervent, humble, hardworking, and gentle the friars were to the Philippines. And not only that, they would defend the Filipinos against the abuses of some of the Spanish soldiers. When we go to the third class, you will see that much had happened really in Spain between Magellan and Legazpi, which will maybe in a way explain why in the Philippines, the way that generally the Spanish crown and the soldiers and the friars dealt with Filipinos was in a way different from the way the conquistadores dealt with the natives of South America. The thing that happened in between is, some of you know this already, is Salamanca, the University of Salamanca, the Dominicans, especially Francisco de la Victoria. Okay, that one we will see in the third class. But let's see first. Okay, we'll have to go very fast. See first how the friars were. Okay, number one, you can just read it on your own. It's also there in the book of Jojo Lopez about what we believed in. So, Batalang May Kapal. You have Anitos. Anitos is really ancestor worship. There were two kinds of ancestors. The good ones, they called Anitos, and the bad ones, they called Katotolan, or sometimes there's no name for them. Apart from these good and bad ancestors, you have all these diwatas and all of the spirits, etc. Very much like, according to this Dominican who's writing this book, who wrote this book in 1965, very much what we would find amongst the Egyptians, Assyrians, etc., even the Greeks. They worship and render divine honors to the sun. They would, if they throw water, they would say, "Excuse me," because there might be a diwata or a anito there. They would not sweep at night because they might kick. Okay. And then this is interesting. They also had the priesthood. This is in the third page. They had the priesthood, mostly the babaylan, mostly female. And then he added, there was also the Catalonan, who were transvestites. So, you know, who were bayot. The ritual was rather feminine in character. Interesting is that we had no blood sacrifice. We would give, I mean, our ancestors would give tokens of chicken and vegetables and fruits, but there was no flow of blood like what they found amongst the Aztecs. Okay. The second and third excerpts here had to do with, okay, the second excerpt had to do with how the Filipinos first regarded God. I mean, the Christian God. It was very much connected with the power, military power of the Spaniards. If you see here, when they asked them, the Filipinos, why they said that no doubt the God of the Spaniards must be very powerful, they replied that more than 700 men had gone. Oh yeah. Okay. 50 of these men died in battle, and the rest died from sickness when they suffered after their flight. And then they would see that amongst the Spaniards, much fewer would die. And so, therefore, they believe that the God of the Spaniards must be very powerful. When we go to, when you have the opportunity to read Rodney Stark, he made a point that it was because of the importance that Christianity gave to reason. That's the reason why when the European nations developed, and that's why when they encountered other peoples like the Filipinos, they were obviously much more developed and more powerful in technology, in politics, in science, because the Europeans were using the reason not only applied to the faith, but applied to their time here on earth. Rodney Stark and Rodney Stark was saying, and this came from Christianity. The only real important religion, the only real religion.
Oh yeah.
That an important theology is and developed theology is Christianity. So I was saying, one of the goals here is to see providence in the whole of human history, providence in the Christianization of the Philippines, and this is very much part of it. When the Spaniards came here, bringing the cross, obviously, in terms of civilization, they were far ahead, and we can see here from Gaspar de San Agustin saying that this is one of the things that the Filipinos recognized. Number 3. Okay, so this number 3 is one from one of the Franciscans noting that in the provinces, many of the natives live in scattered settlements far from each other, and that the sacraments cannot be administered to them unless they come together in larger communities to build towns for themselves. You shall put it in execution by gathering the natives together to build their respective towns and churches. Okay, so this was the general policy, the Bajo la Campana policy. And one of the primary ideas here, in fact, maybe the only real efficacious idea behind this is the evangelization of the Filipinos. So number 4 even states it even more powerfully. The first thing they do in a place where the religious are going to form a doctrina, so to evangelize, is to see to the building of the church and the houses in which at least 2 religious can live conveniently according to their rule and constitutions. Thus, by their way of life in the house and by the methods of teaching the Indios, they can accompany their preaching with the Indios, they can accompany their preaching with the example of their lives. And this is what we see in one primary source after another. Okay, number 5 talks about the friars defending the Filipinos from the abuses. In the matter of temporal government, the Indios are treated with great gentleness, and by the favor of the religious, the officers of justice do not oppress them, but rather bear with them in many matters. So, and the religious has a hand in everything. The religious, he sees to it that in matter of punishment and chastisement, the greatest possible gentleness is used. His purpose is that too great rigor in temporal matters may not discourage them in spiritual matters. And since the religious proceed disinterestedly in everything, inasmuch as they are maintained by the lords of the Indios and they do not get it from the Filipinos, it becomes clear to the latter, the Filipinos, that everything is done for them out of love and charity. Verse 6. The Indians saw that they, the friars, were without interest for their own personal welfare, and noticed that when they called them for some matter, when the Filipinos called the friars for some matter, whether by day or by night, in rain or thunderstorm, the fathers never considered or seemed to consider the request to come unreasonable. Hence, many began to ask for baptism and others for confession, both in good health and in sickness. As a result, though though the work increased, it became more bearable and even pleasant. Number 7. Here is an example of sometimes it took time. 11 years since the religious of Saint Dominic entered the province of Pangasinan. And after 11 years, they were still finding it difficult. Okay? The beginning of belief, the Lord took from this beginning of belief, the Lord took from what the Indians perceived about the way the friars lived, their fasts and their penances, their patience in trials, and the fact that they not only did no evil to them, but rather helped them in their necessities. Then they began to grow more gentle and to believe what they told them. So we're talking about 11 years, okay, a decade. Now, there's this anecdote here. A chief among the Indios went one night to a religious and said to him, "Father, you must know that for 3 years now I have been watching you, and I have taken particular notice of all that you do. As I see, all of you have one way of proceeding, and if one does not eat, neither does the other. If one rises to pray at midnight, so do the others. As one scourges himself almost every night, so do the others. As one avoids women, so do all. All of you go by one rule, one way. You do not seek gold or silver. You treat yourselves in. You are patient. Everything you do is to do us good. Thus, I have determined to believe you because I am convinced that people who act like this do not lie." Okay. Number 8. Number 8, I think, shows, and here maybe we can ask Arwin Bibar, to proceed with this research on missionary linguistics. Because from the very beginning, the friars, instead of trying to teach the Filipino Spanish, we will learn their language and teach the faith to them in their language. Thus, in the book of the Pope, Benedict XVI, I think it's The Light of the World. I'm not sure about the title. He mentions the Philippines as a good example of acculturation of the faith, more than South America. Benedict XVI emphasized the Philippines more than South America. Well, I'm not quite sure how it was in South America, but I think, at least from a human perspective, this could very well be one of the reasons. The faith reached us in our language through the Spanish friars instead of through Spanish. And, all of these theories about, our identity is in our language. So by trying to explain the faith in the Philippine languages, well, I think this is one of the reasons why it's very deeply rooted, despite the propaganda of the revolutionaries later on, and despite the fact that, well, maybe it can be admitted that the religious somewhat lost a little bit of the original fervor that we find here in the beginnings. Despite all of that, it was never really a big difficulty for us to carry on believing in the faith, okay? Except for a few of the Ilustrados, who lost their faith. Okay, so number 8 talks about this Father Domingo de Neva, who was able to speak the language with fluency. Number 9 also talks about that. Fray Blas de la Madre de Dios learned the language of the natives and employed this in the conversion of pagans in the province of Laguna de Bay. from these people, he formed some towns. So you can see there's a lot of evidence that the friars were very much part of the forming of the town. Number 10 also emphasizes this. Nothing can be done in the ministry of the religious if the religious do not learn the language of the natives. The religious of this province have always occupied themselves in this with great care. And you have, okay, plenty of surviving works that give evidence to the fact that, okay, the friars learned our language rather than try to teach us Spanish, to learn the faith through Spanish. Okay. Number 11, well, you can read it now on your own. Number 11 is, our methods of preaching to these people is not so much by means of argument and reasoned proofs, which make but little impression on them, as by a sort of spiritual conference in which the Father briefly presents to them one or two points, repeating them and asking questions concerning them. Okay, catechism.
Asking questions. Okay. Reason.
Number 12 is about some of the fervor that some of the preachers, the friars teach sermons, and this would affect the Filipinos, and they would be emotionally that too. Now this is interesting because it was also one of the policies of the head. And once you have the head of a whole barangay, everyone else will follow. But at the same time, they also taught the children. They would invite the children to their convent. They would give catechism, and then when the children would go home, they would show good example to the parents, and the parents will, oh, so this is something good. I think number 14 talks about that, I think, about the children being the ones giving good example to the parents. Number 13 shows that not everything was smooth. There were still some barangays that revolted, and in fact revolted in very curious ways. There is this the story about certain people going crazy, and one of them calling themselves the Eternal Father, another one calling himself God the Son and God the Holy Spirit, and one India called Iga calling herself Holy Mary, and so they revolted, and despite the friars trying to convince them to go there to convince them, the names are written here, so they were not, so they had to be subdued by force. Okay, and so the revolt was pacified. Well, 15. Well, anyway, so it's 15 is about somebody who was a thief, was touched in the heart, and gave up and gave back everything that he stole. And then you have quite a number of anecdotes about holiness amongst Filipinos. Here you have two amongst Filipinas. I mean, young girls who were being tempted by even the Spaniards, but then who says no. Okay, number 16 is about that. Number 17 is about an Indio who began to apply the discipline to himself, and he was serving in the army, in the one of the amongst the soldiers, the Spanish soldiers, and then the captain of the army saw him applying the discipline to himself at night, and the captain, the Spanish captain, was edified and says, "You go home because the army is not a place for you. And do not corrupt yourself among soldiers." So that's the end of the anecdote. Number 18 is another example of a young girl who was, this time she was being seduced by a Filipino, but then she remained steadfast, and in the end, her pursuer left her in peace. Number 19 is about a pagan, a Pampango soldier, okay, who showed mercy upon a slave of a pagan who was a Christian and went out of his way to make sure that that slave was able to go to the priest in case he would die, and the pagan owner of the slave was moved by this. He was a Moro. I mean, the pagan was a Moro. This anecdote ends with, surely this is a magnificent proof of the zeal with which the Indians of this nation even profess our holy faith. Okay, we end here because so far what we're talking about here are missions that are taken care of by the religious. The religious came here in tranches. The first ones were the Augustinians, who came with Legazpi, and the second one were the Jesuits. The Dominicans followed, and then the Recoletos. So 4. The Recolectors were the ones who were late. Jesuits were here ahead of the Dominicans, and it was Philip who was sending these. But okay, one thing is the missions taken care of by the religious. Another thing is the hierarchy of the church. I mean, the hierarchical organization of the church, which was put up in 1597. So about 30 years after Legazpi arrived. And this we end with this. This is Philip II, 1579, saying to the king, to the governor of the Philippines, Fray Domingo de Salazar of the Dominican Order, bishop of those islands, has reported to us that he is going to take up residence in those islands. He is taking with him religious of his order, Dominicans, to found monasteries and to take care of the conversion and instruction of the natives. So here we have a kind of mishmash, and later on we will see that there will be tension here between the missions taking care of the religious, the diocesan organization taken care of by, well, I mean, it's supposed to be the secular, but even this bishop was a Dominican. And then later on, of course, the whole question of the native clergy. We will see that in, well, a little bit of that tomorrow. All right. 4 minutes. We have to end here. All right.
Let us pray. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, et hora mortis nostre. Amen.
Sancta Michael, ora pro nobis. Sancta Peter,
ora pro nobis.
Santa Maria, Spes Pracedes Sapiens.
Ora pro nobis.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.